"I'll kill you," he shouted, and snatching up a marble slab from a table, with a strength he had not known in himself till then, he made a step towards her and waved it at her. Ellen's face was terrible to see. She shrieked and darted away from him. His father's nature showed itself in him. Pierre felt the abandonment and the fascination of frenzy. He flung down the slab, shivering it into fragments, and with open arms swooping down upon Ellen, screamed, "Go!" in a voice so terrible that they heard it all over the house with horror. God knows what Pierre would have done at that moment if Ellen had not run out of the room. A week later, Pierre had made over to his wife the revenue from all his estates in Great Russia, which made up the larger half of his property, and had gone away alone to Petersburg. Chapter 7. 2 months had passed since the news of the defeat of Austerlitz and the loss of Prince Andrei had reached Bleak Hills. In spite of all researches and letters through the Russian embassy, his body had not been found, nor was he among the prisoners. What made it worst of all for his father and sister was the fact that there was still hope that he might have been picked up on the battlefield by people of the country, and might perhaps be lying, recovering, or dying somewhere alone, among strangers, incapable of giving any account of himself. The newspapers, from which the old prince had first heard of the defeat at Austerlitz, had, as always, given very brief and vague accounts of how the Russians had been obliged, after brilliant victories, to retreat, and had made their withdrawal in perfect order. The old prince saw from this official account that our army had been defeated. A week after the newspaper that had brought news of the defeat of Austerlitz came a letter from Kutuzow, who described to the old prince the part taken in it by his son. "Before my eyes," wrote Kutuzow, "your son with the flag in his hands, at the head of a regiment, fell like a hero, worthy of his father and his fatherland. To my regret, and the general regret of the whole army, it has not been ascertained up to now whether he is alive or dead. I comfort myself and you with the hope that your son is living, as, otherwise, he would have been mentioned among the officers found on the field of battle, a list of whom has been given me under flag of truce." After receiving this letter, late in the evening when he was alone in his study, the old prince went for his morning walk as usual next day. But he was silent with the bailiff, the gardener, and the architect, and though he looked wrathful, said nothing to them. When Princess Maria went in to him at the usual hour, he was standing at the lathe, and went on turning as usual, without looking round at her. "Ah, Princess Maria," he said suddenly, in an unnatural voice, and he let the lathe go. The wheel swung round from the impetus. Long after, Princess Maria remembered the dying creak of the wheel, which was associated for her with what followed. Princess Maria went up to him. She caught sight of his face, and something seemed suddenly to give way within her. Her eyes could not see clearly. From her father's face, not sad nor crushed, but vindictive and full of unnatural conflict, she saw that there was hanging over her, coming to crush her, a terrible calamity, the worst in life, a calamity she had not known till then, a calamity irrevocable, irremediable, the death of one beloved. "Father, Andrei?" said the ungainly, awkward princess, with such unutterable beauty of sorrow and self-forgetfulness that her father could not bear to meet her eyes, and turned away, sobbing. "I have had news. Not among the prisoners, not among the killed, Kutuzow writes." He screamed shrilly, as though he would drive his daughter away with that shriek. "Killed!" The princess did not swoon. She did not fall into a faint. She was pale, but when she heard those words, her face was transformed, and there was a radiance of something in her beautiful, luminous eyes, something like joy, an exalted joy, apart from the sorrows and joys of this world, flooded the bitter grief she felt within her. She forgot all her terror of her father, went up to him, took him by the hand, drew him to her, and put her arm about his withered, sinewy neck. "Father," she said, "do not turn away from me. Let us weep for him together." "Blackguards! Scoundrels!" screamed the old man, turning his face away from her. "Destroying the army! Destroying men! What for? Go! Go and tell Liza." Princess Maria sank helplessly into an armchair beside her father and burst into tears. She could see her brother now at the moment when he parted from her and from Liza, with his tender and at the same time haughty expression. She saw him at the moment when tenderly and ironically he had put the image on. Did he believe now? Had he repented of his unbelief? Was he there now? There in the realm of eternal peace and blessedness, she wondered. "Father, tell me how it was," she asked through her tears. "Go away, go. Killed in a defeat into which they led the best men of Russia, and the glory of Russia, to ruin. Go away, Princess Maria. Go and tell Liza. I will come." When Princess Maria went back from her father, the little princess was sitting at her work, and she looked up with that special inward look of happy calm that is peculiar to women with child. It was clear that her eyes were not seeing Princess Maria, but looking deep within herself, at some happy mystery that was being accomplished within her. "Marie," she said, moving away from the embroidery frame and leaning back, "give me your hand." She took her sister-in-law's hand and laid it below her waist. Her eyes smiled, expectant. Her little dewy lip was lifted, and stayed so in childlike rapture. Princess Maria knelt down before her, and hid her face in the folds of her sister-in-law's dress. "There, do you feel it? I feel so strange. And do you know, Marie, I am going to love him very much," said Liza, looking at her sister-in-law with shining, happy eyes. Princess Maria could not lift her head. She was crying. "What's the matter with you, Marie?" "Nothing. Only I felt sad. Sad about André," she said, brushing away the tears on the folds of her sister-in-law's dress. Several times in the course of the morning, Princess Maria began trying to prepare her sister-in-law's mind, and every time she began to weep. These tears, which the little princess could not account for, agitated her, little as she was observant in general. She said nothing, but looked about her uneasily as though seeking for something. Before dinner, the old prince, of whom she was always afraid, came into her room, with a particularly restless and malignant expression, and went out without uttering a word. She looked at Princess Maria with that expression of attention concentrated within herself that is only seen in women with child, and suddenly she burst into tears. "Have you heard news from André?" she said. "No. You know news could not come yet. But father is uneasy, and I feel frightened." "Then you have heard nothing?" "Nothing," said Princess Maria, looking resolutely at her with her luminous eyes. She had made up her mind not to tell her, and had persuaded her father to conceal the dreadful news from her till her confinement, which was expected before many days. Princess Maria and the old prince, in their different ways, bore and hid their grief. The old prince refused to hope. He made up his mind that Prince André had been killed, and though he sent a clerk to Austria to seek for traces of his son, he ordered a monument for him in Moscow, and intended to put it up in his garden, and he told everyone that his son was dead. He tried to keep up his old manner of life unchanged, but his strength was failing him. He walked less, ate less, slept less, and every day he grew weaker. Princess Maria went on hoping. She prayed for her brother, as living, and every moment she expected news of his return. Chapter 8. "Ma bonne amie," said the little princess, after breakfast, on the morning of the 19th of March, and her little downy lip was lifted as of old. But as in that house, since the terrible news had come, smiles, tones of voice, movements even, bore the stamp of mourning, so now the smile of the little princess, who was influenced by the general temper without knowing its cause, was such that more than all else it was eloquent of the common burden of sorrow. "My dear, I am afraid that this morning's Frühstück, as Folka calls it, has disagreed with me." "What is the matter with you, my darling? You look pale." "Oh, you are very pale," said Princess Maria in alarm, running with her soft, ponderous tread up to her sister-in-law. "Shouldn't we send for Maria Bogdanovna, Your Excellency?" said one of the maids who was present. Maria Bogdanovna was a midwife from a district town, who had been for the last fortnight at Bleak Hills. "Yes, truly," assented Princess Maria. "Perhaps it is really that. I'll go and get her. Courage, my angel." She kissed Liza, and was going out of the room. "Oh, no, no!" And besides her pallor, the face of the little princess expressed a childish terror at the inevitable physical suffering before her. "No, it is indigestion. Say it is indigestion. Say so, Marie, say so." And the little princess began to cry, wringing her little hands with childish misery and capriciousness, and affected exaggeration too. Princess Maria ran out of the room to fetch Maria Bogdanovna. "Mon Dieu! Mon Dieu! Oh!" she heard behind her. The midwife was already on her way to meet her, rubbing her plump, small, white hands, with a face of significant composure. "Maria Bogdanovna, I think it has begun," said Princess Maria, looking with wide-open, frightened eyes at the midwife. "Well, I thank God for it," said Maria Bogdanovna, not hastening her step. "You young ladies have no need to know anything about it." "But how is it the doctor has not come from Moscow yet?" said the princess. In accordance with the wishes of Liza and Prince Andrei, they had sent to Moscow for a doctor, and were expecting him every minute. "It's no matter, princess, don't be uneasy," said Maria Bogdanovna. "We shall do very well without the doctor." 5 minutes later, the princess from her room heard something heavy being carried by. She peeped out. The footmen were for some reason moving into the bedroom the leather sofa which stood in Prince Andrei's study. There was a solemn and subdued look on the men's faces. Princess Maria sat alone in her room, listening to the sounds of the house, now and then opening the door when anyone passed by and looking at what was taking place in the corridor. Several women passed to and fro, treading softly. They glanced at the princess and turned away from her. She did not venture to ask questions, and going back to her room, closed the door and sat still in an armchair, or took up her prayer book, or knelt down before the shrine. To her distress and astonishment, she felt that prayer did not soothe her emotion. All at once, the door of her room was softly opened, and she saw on the threshold her old nurse, Praskovya Savishna, with a kerchief over her head. The old woman hardly ever, owing to the old prince's prohibition, came into her room. "I've come to sit a bit with thee, Mashenka," said the nurse. "And here I've brought the prince's wedding candles to light before his saint, my angel," she said, sighing. "Ah, how glad I am, nurse." "God is merciful, my darling." The nurse lighted the gilt candles before the shrine, and sat down with her stocking near the door. Princess Maria took a book and began reading. Only when they heard steps or voices, the princess and the nurse looked at one another, one with alarmed inquiry, the other with soothing reassurance in her face. The feeling that Princess Maria was experiencing as she sat in her room had overpowered the whole house and taken possession of everyone. Owing to the belief that the fewer people know of the sufferings of a woman in labor, the less she suffers, everyone tried to affect to know nothing of it. No one talked about it, but over and above the habitual staidness and respectfulness of good manners that always reigned in the prince's household, there was apparent in all a sort of anxiety, a softening of the heart, and a consciousness of some great, unfathomable mystery being accomplished at that moment. There was no sound of laughter in the big room where the maids sat. In the waiting room the men all sat in silence, as it were on alert. Torches and candles were burning in the serfs' quarters, and no one slept. The old prince walked about his study, treading on his heels, and sent Tikhon to Marya Bogdanovna to ask what news. "Only say, the prince has sent to ask what news, and come and tell me what she says." "Inform the prince that the labor has commenced," said Marya Bogdanovna, looking significantly at the messenger. Tikhon went and gave the prince that information. "Very good," said the prince, closing the door behind him, and Tikhon heard not the slightest sound in the study after that. After a short interval, Tikhon went into the study, as though to attend to the candles. Seeing the prince lying on the couch, Tikhon looked at him, looked at his perturbed face, shook his head, went up to him dumbly, and kissed him on the shoulder, then went out without touching the candles or saying why he had come. The most solemn mystery in the world was being accomplished. Evening passed, night came on, and the feeling of suspense and softening of the heart before the unfathomable did not wane, but grew more intense. No one slept. It was one of those March nights when winter seems to regain its sway, and flings its last snows and storms with malignant desperation. A relay of horses had been sent to the high-road for the German doctor who was expected every minute, and men were dispatched on horseback with lanterns to the turning at the crossroads to guide him over the holes and treacherous places in the ice. Princess Marya had long abandoned her book. She sat in silence, her luminous eyes fixed on the wrinkled face of her old nurse, so familiar to her in the minutest detail, on the lock of gray hair that had escaped from the kerchief, on the baggy looseness of the skin under her chin. The old nurse, with her stocking in her hand, talked away in a soft voice, not hearing it herself, nor following the meaning of her own words, telling, as she had told hundreds of times before, how the late princess had been brought to bed of Princess Marya at Kishinev, and had only a Moldavian peasant woman instead of a midwife. "God is merciful. Doctors are never wanted," she said. Suddenly a gust of wind blew on one of the window frames. By the prince's decree, the double frames were always taken out of every window when the larks returned, and flinging open a badly fastened window bolt, set the stiff curtain fluttering, and the chill, snowy draught blew out the candle. Princess Marya shuddered. The nurse, putting down her stocking, went to the window, and putting her head out, tried to catch the open frame. The cold wind flapped the ends of her kerchief and the grey locks of her hair. "Princess, my dearie, there's someone driving up the avenue," she said, holding the window frame and not closing it. "With lanterns. It must be the doctor." "Ah, my God! Thank God!" said the Princess Marya. "I must go and meet him. He does not know Russian." Princess Marya flung on a shawl and ran to meet the stranger. As she passed through the anteroom, she saw through the window a carriage and lanterns standing at the entrance. She went out onto the stairs. At the post of the balustrade stood a tallow candle guttering in the draught. The footman Philip, looking scared, stood below on the first landing of the staircase, with another candle in his hand. Still lower down, at the turn of the winding stairs, steps in thick overshoes could be heard coming up, and a voice, familiar it seemed to Princess Marya, was saying something. "Thank God," said the voice. "And father?" "He has gone to bed," answered the voice of the butler Demyan, who was below. Then the voice said something more. Demyan answered something, and the steps in thick overshoes began approaching more rapidly up the unseen part of the staircase. "It is Andrei," thought Princess Marya. "No, it cannot be. It would be too extraordinary," she thought. And at the very instant she was thinking so, on the landing where the footman stood with a candle, there came into sight the face and figure of Prince Andrei, in a fur coat, with a deep collar covered with snow. Yes, it was he, but pale and thin, and with a transformed, strangely softened, agitated expression on his face. He went up the stairs and embraced his sister. "You did not get my letter, then?" he asked, and not waiting for an answer, which he would not have received, for the princess could not speak, he turned back, and with the doctor who was behind him, they had met at the last station, he ran again rapidly upstairs and again embraced his sister. "What a strange fate," he said. "Masha, darling." And flinging off his fur coat and overboots, he went towards the little princess's room. Chapter 9. The little princess was lying on the pillows in her white nightcap. The agony had only a moment left her. Her black hair lay in curls about her swollen and perspiring cheeks. Her rosy, charming little mouth, with the downy lip, was open, and she was smiling joyfully. Prince Andrei went into the room, and stood facing her at the foot of the bed on which she lay. The glittering eyes, staring in childish terror and excitement, rested on him with no change in their expression. "I love you all. I have done no one any harm. Why am I suffering? Help me," her face seemed to say. She saw her husband, but she did not take in the meaning of his appearance now before her. Prince Andrei went round the bed and kissed her on the forehead. "My precious," he said, a word he had never used, speaking to her before. "God is merciful." She stared at him with a face of inquiry, of childish reproach. "I hoped for help from you, and nothing, nothing. You too," her eyes said. She was not surprised at his having come. She did not understand that he had come. His coming had nothing to do with her agony and its alleviation. The pains began again, and Marya Bogdanovna advised Prince Andrei to go out of the room. The doctor went into the room. Prince Andrei came out, and meeting Princess Marya, went to her again. They talked in whispers, but every moment their talk was hushed. They were waiting and listening. "Go, mon ami," said Princess Marya. Prince Andrei went again to his wife, and sat down in the adjoining room, waiting. A woman ran out of the bedroom with a frightened face, and was disconcerted on seeing Prince Andrei. He hid his face in his hands and sat so for some minutes. Piteous, helpless, animal groans came from the next room. Prince Andrei got up, went to the door, and would have opened it. Someone was holding the door. "Can't come in, can't," a frightened voice said from within. He began walking about the room. The screams ceased. Several seconds passed. Suddenly a fearful scream, not her scream, could she scream like that, came from the room. Prince Andrei ran to the door. The scream ceased. He heard the cry of a baby. What have they taken a baby in there for? Prince Andrei wondered for the first second. A baby? What baby? Why a baby there? Or is the baby born? When he suddenly realized all the joyful significance of that cry, tears choked him, and leaning both elbows on the window-sill he cried, sobbing as children cry. The door opened. The doctor, with his shirt-sleeves tucked up and no coat on, came out of the room, pale, and his lower jaw twitching. Prince Andrei addressed him, but the doctor, looking at him in a distracted way, passed by without uttering a word. A woman ran out, and seeing Prince Andrei, stopped hesitating in the door. He went into his wife's room. She was lying dead in the same position in which he had seen her 5 minutes before, and in spite of the fixed gaze and white cheeks, there was the same expression still on the charming childish face, with a little lip covered with fine dark hair. "I love you all, and have done no harm to anyone, and what have you done to me?" said her charming, piteous, dead face. In a corner of the room was something red and tiny, squealing and grunting in the trembling white hands of Marya Bogdanovna. 2 hours later, Prince Andrei went with soft steps into his father's room. The old man knew everything already. He was standing near the door, and, as soon as it opened, his rough old arms closed like a vice round his son's neck, and without a word he burst into sobs like a child. 3 days afterwards, the little princess was buried, and Prince Andrei went to the steps of the tomb to take his last farewell of her. Even in the coffin the face was the same, though the eyes were closed. "Ah, what have you done to me?" it still seemed to say, and Prince Andrei felt that something was being torn out of his soul, that he was guilty of a crime that he could never set right nor forget. He could not weep. The old man too went in and kissed the little waxen hand that lay so peacefully crossed over the other, and to him too her face said, "Ah, what have you done to me, and why?" And the old man turned angrily away when he caught sight of the face. In another 5 days there followed the christening of the young prince, Nikolai Andreitch. The nurse held the swaddling clothes up to her chin, while the priest with a goose feather anointed the baby's red, wrinkled hands and feet. His grandfather, who was his godfather, trembling and afraid of dropping the baby, carried him round the battered tin font, and handed him over to the godmother, Princess Maria. Faint with terror that they would let the baby drown in the font, Prince Andrei sat in an adjoining room, waiting for the conclusion of the ceremony. He looked joyfully at the baby when the nurse brought him out, and nodded approvingly when the nurse told him that a bit of wax with the baby's hairs in it, thrown into the font, had not sunk in the water, but floated on the surface. Chapter 10. Rostov's share in the duel between Dolokhov and Betsuhov had been hushed up by the efforts of the old count, and instead of being degraded to the ranks, as Nikolai had expected, he had been appointed an adjutant to the governor of Moscow. In consequence of this, he could not go to the country with the rest of the family, but was kept by his new duties all the summer in Moscow. Dolokhov recovered, and Rostov became particularly friendly with him during his convalescence. Dolokhov lay ill in the house of his mother, who was tenderly and passionately devoted to him. Maria Ivanovna, who had taken a fancy to Rostov, seeing his attachment to her Fedya, often talked to him about her son. "Yes, Count, he is too noble, too pure-hearted," she would say, "for the corrupt society of our day. Virtue is in favor with no one. It is apt to be a reproach to everybody. Come, tell me, Count, was it right? Was it honorable on Betsuhov's part? Fedya, in his noble-hearted way, loved him, and even now he never says a word against him. In Petersburg, those pranks with the police constables, those practical jokes they played there, didn't they do everything together? And Betsuhov got nothing for it, while Fedya took all the blame on his shoulders. What has he had to go through? He has been reinstated, I know, but how could they help reinstating him? I don't suppose there were many such gallant, true sons of their fatherland out there. And now what? This duel. Is there any feeling, any honor left in men? Knowing he was the only son, to call him out and aim so straight at him. We may be thankful God has been merciful to us. And what was it all for? Why, who hasn't intrigues nowadays? Why, if he were so jealous, I can understand it. He ought to have let it be seen long before, you know, and it had been going on for a year. And then to call him out, reckoning on Fedya's not fighting him because he was indebted to him. What baseness, what vileness! I know you understand Fedya, my dear Count, and that's why I love you, believe me, from my heart. Few do understand him. His is such a lofty, heavenly nature. Dolokhov himself, during his convalescence, often said to Rostov things which could not have been expected from him. "People think me a wicked man, I know," he would say, "and they're welcome to think so. I don't care to know anyone except those whom I love. But those I do love, I love in such a way that I would give my life for them, and all the rest I will crush if they get in my way. I have a precious and adored mother, and 2 or 3 friends, you among them, and as to the rest, I only pay attention to them in so far as they are useful or mischievous. And almost all are mischievous, especially the women. Yes, my dear," he went on, "men I have met who were loving, noble and lofty-minded, but women that were not cattle for sale, countesses and cooks, they're all alike, I have not come across yet. I have not yet met the angelic purity and devotion which I look for in woman. If I could find such a woman, I would give my life for her. But these creatures—" He made a gesture of contempt. "But believe me, if I still care for life, I care for it because I still hope to meet such a heavenly creature, who would regenerate and purify and elevate me. But you don't understand that." "Yes, I quite understand," answered Rostov, who was very much under the influence of his new friend. In the autumn, the Rostov family returned to Moscow. At the beginning of the winter, Denisov too came back and stayed again with the Rostovs. The early part of the winter of 1806, spent by Nikolai Rostov in Moscow, was one of the happiest and liveliest periods for him and all the family. Nikolai brought a lot of young men about him into his parents' house. Vera was a handsome girl of 20, Sonia a girl of 16, with all the charm of an opening flower, Natasha, half grown up, half a child, at one time childishly absurd, and at another fascinating with the charm of a young girl. The Rostovs' house was at that time full of a sort of peculiar atmosphere of love-making, as commonly happens in a household where there are very young and very charming girls. Among those young girls' faces, impressionable and always smiling, probably at their own happiness, in that whirl of eager bustle, amid that young feminine chatter, so inconsequent, but so friendly to everyone, so ready for anything, so full of hope, and the inconsequent sound of singing and of music, any young man who came into the house felt the same sensation of readiness to fall in love and longing for happiness that the younger members of the Rostov household were feeling themselves. Among the young men Rostov brought to the house, one of the foremost was Dolohov, who was liked by everyone in the house except Natasha. She almost had a quarrel with her brother over Dolohov. She persisted that he was a spiteful man, that in the duel with Betsuhov, Pierre had been in the right and Dolohov in the wrong, and that he was horrid and not natural. "I know nothing about it, indeed," Natasha would cry with self-willed obstinacy. "He's spiteful and heartless. Your Denisov now, you see, I like. He's a rake and all that, but still I like him. So I do understand. I don't know how to tell you. With him everything is done on a plan, and I don't like that. Denisov now—" "Oh, Denisov's another matter," answered Nikolai, in a tone that implied that in comparison with Dolohov, even Denisov was not of much account. One must understand what soul there is in that Dolohov. One must see him with his mother. Such a noble heart. I know nothing about that, but I don't feel at home with him. And do you know he's falling in love with Sonia?" "What nonsense!" "I'm sure. You will see he is." Natasha's prediction was fulfilled. Dolohov, who did not as a rule care for ladies, began to come often to the house, and the question, for whose sake he came, was soon, though no one spoke of it, decided. It was on Sonia's account. And though Sonia would never have ventured to say so, she knew it, and blushed scarlet every time Dolohov made his appearance. Dolohov often dined at the Rostovs, never missed a performance at which they were to be present, and attended Yogol's balls for the boys and girls, at which the Rostovs were always to be found. He showed marked attention to Sonia, and looked at her with such an expression in his eyes that Sonia could not bear his eyes on her without turning crimson, and even the old Countess and Natasha blushed when they saw that look. It was evident that this strong, strange man could not shake off the impression made on him by the dark, graceful young girl, who was in love with another man. Rostov noticed something new between Dolohov and Sonia, but he did not define to himself precisely what that new attitude was. They are all in love with someone, he thought of Sonia and Natasha. But he did not feel quite at his ease, as before, with Sonia and Dolohov, and he began to be less often at home. In the autumn of 1806, everyone was beginning to talk again of war with Napoleon, and with even greater fervor than in the previous year. A levy was decreed, not only of 10 recruits for active service, but of 9 militiamen for the reserve as well, from every 1,000 of the population. Everywhere Bonaparte was anathematized, and the only thing talked of in Moscow was the impending war. To the Rostov family, the interest of these preparations for war was entirely centered in the fact that Nikolushka refused to remain longer in Moscow, and was only waiting for the end of Denisov's leave to rejoin his regiment with him after the holidays. His approaching departure, far from hindering him from enjoying himself, gave an added zest to his pleasures. The greater part of his time he spent away from home, at dinners, parties, and balls. Chapter 11. On the 3rd day after Christmas, Nikolai dined at home, which he had rarely done of late. This was a farewell dinner in Nikolai's honor, as he was to set off with Denisov after the baptism festival to rejoin his regiment. 20 persons were dining, among them Dolohov and Denisov. Never had the love in the air of the Rostovs' house, never had the atmosphere of being in love, made itself so strongly felt as during those Christmas holidays. Seize the moment of happiness, love and be loved. That is the only thing real in the world. The rest is all nonsense. And that is the one thing we are interested in here, was the sentiment that atmosphere was eloquent of. After exhausting 2 pairs of horses, as he did every day without having been everywhere he ought to have been, and everywhere he had been invited, Nikolai reached home just at dinner time. As soon as he went in, he felt that intense atmosphere of love in the house. But in addition to that, he became conscious of a strange embarrassment that seemed to prevail between certain persons in the company. Sonia seemed particularly disturbed, so did Dolohov and the old countess, and in a lesser degree Natasha. Nikolai saw that something must have passed before dinner between Sonia and Dolohov, and with the delicate instinct characteristic of him, he was very sympathetic and wary with both of them during dinner. On that evening there was to be one of the dances given by Yogel, the dancing master, during the holidays to his pupils. "Nikolenka, are you going to Yogel's? Please do go," said Natasha. "He particularly begged you to, and Vasily Dmitrievich," this was Denisov, "is going." "Where would I not go at the Countess's commands?" said Denisov, who had jestingly taken up the role of Natasha's knight in the Rostov household. "I'm ready to dance the pas de châle." "If I have time. I promised the Arharovs. They have a party," said Nikolai. "And you?" He turned to Dolohov. And as soon as he had asked the question, he saw that he should not have asked it. "Yes, possibly," Dolohov answered coldly and angrily, glancing at Sonia, and he glanced again, scowling at Nikolai with exactly the same look with which he had looked at Pierre at the club dinner. There's something wrong, thought Nikolai, and he was still more confirmed in that surmise when, immediately after dinner, Dolohov went away. He beckoned Natasha and asked her what had happened. "I was looking for you," said Natasha, running out to him. "I told you so, and still you wouldn't believe me," she said triumphantly. "He has made Sonia an offer." Little as Nikolai had been thinking of Sonia of late, he felt as if something were being torn from him when he heard this. Dolohov was a good and in some respects a brilliant match for the portionless orphan Sonia. From the point of view of the Countess and of society, it was out of the question for her to refuse him, and so Nikolai's first feeling when he heard of it was one of exasperation against Sonia. He braced himself up to say, "And a capital thing, too. Of course, she must forget her childish promises and accept the offer." But he had not succeeded in saying this when Natasha said, "Only fancy, she has refused him, absolutely refused him. She says she loves someone else," she added, after a brief pause. "Yes, my Sonia could not do otherwise," thought Nikolai. "Mamma begged her ever so many times not to, but she refused. And I know she won't change. If she has said a thing—" "And Mamma begged her not to?" Nikolai said reproachfully. Yes, said Natasha. Do you know Nikolenka? Don't be angry. But I know you won't marry her. I know. I don't know why. But I know for certain that you won't marry her. Well, you can't know that, said Nikolai. But I want to talk to her. How charming Sonia is, he added, smiling. Yes, she is so charming. I'll send her in to you. And Natasha kissed her brother and ran away. A minute later Sonia came in, looking frightened, distraught, and guilty. Nikolai went up to her and kissed her hand. It was the first time since his return that they had talked alone and of their love. "Sophie," he said to her, at first timidly, but more and more boldly as he went on, "if you were simply refusing a brilliant, an advantageous match. But he's a splendid, noble fellow. He's my friend." Sonia interrupted him. "I have refused him," she said hastily. "If you are refusing him for my sake, I am afraid that I—" Sonia again cut him short. With frightened, imploring eyes, she looked at him. "Nikolenka, don't say that to me," she said. "No, I must. Perhaps it's suffisance on my part, but still it's better to say it. If you are refusing him on my account, I ought to tell you the whole truth. I love you, I believe, more than anyone." "That's enough for me," said Sonia, flushing crimson. "No, but I have been in love 1,000 times, and I shall fall in love again, though such a feeling of affection, confidence, and love I have for no one as for you. Then I am young. Mamma does not wish it. Well, in fact, I can make no promise. And I beg you to consider the offer of Dolohov," he said, with an effort articulating the name of his friend. "Don't speak to me of it. I want nothing. I love you as a brother, and shall always love you, and I want nothing more." "You are an angel. I'm not worthy of you, but I'm only afraid of deceiving you." Nikolai kissed her hand once more. Chapter 12. Yogels were the most enjoyable balls in Moscow. So the mammas said, as they looked at their boys and girls, executing the steps they had only lately learnt. So too said the boys and girls themselves, who danced till they were ready to drop. So too said the grown-up girls and young men, who came to these dances in a spirit of condescension, and found in them the greatest enjoyment. That year 2 matches had been made at those dances. The 2 pretty young Princesses Gorchakov had found suitors there, and had been married, and this had given the dances even greater vogue than before. What distinguished these dances from others was the absence of host and hostess, and the presence of the good-humored Iogel, who had sold tickets for lessons to all his guests, and fluttered about like a feather, bowing and scraping in accordance with the rules of his art. Another point of difference, too, was that none came to these dances but those who really wanted to dance and enjoy themselves, in the way that girls of 13 and 14 do, putting on long dresses for the first time. All, with rare exceptions, were or looked pretty, so ecstatically they smiled and so rapturously their eyes sparkled. The pas de châle even was sometimes danced by the best pupils, among whom Natasha was the best of all, and conspicuous for her gracefulness. But at this last ball they only danced écossaise, anglaise, and a mazurka that was just coming into fashion. The great hall had been taken by Yogel in the house of Betsuhov, and the ball, as everyone said, was a great success. There were many pretty girls, and the Rostov girls were among the prettiest. They were both particularly happy and gay. That evening Sonia, elated by Dolohov's offer, her refusal, and her interview with Nikolai, had kept whirling round at home, not letting her maid have a chance of doing her hair, and now at the dance she was transparently radiant with impulsive happiness. Natasha, no less elated at being for the first time at a real ball in a long skirt, was even happier. Both the girls wore white muslin dresses with pink ribbons. Natasha fell in love the moment she walked into the ballroom. She was not in love with anyone in particular, but in love with everyone. Whomever she looked at, for the moment that she was looking at him, she was in love with. "Oh, how nice it is!" she kept saying, running up to Sonia. Nikolai and Denisov walked about the room and looked with friendly patronage at the dancers. "How sweet she is! She will be a beauty," said Denisov. "Who?" "Countess Natasha," answered Denisov. "And how she dances! What grace!" he said again, after a short pause. "Of whom are you speaking?" "Why, of your sister!" cried Denisov angrily. Rostov laughed. "My dear Count, you are one of my best pupils. You must dance," said little Yogel, coming up to Nikolai. "Look at all these pretty young ladies." He turned with the same request to Denisov, who had also at one time been his pupil. "No, my dear fellow, I will be a wallflower," said Denisov. "Don't you remember how little credit I did to your teaching?" "Oh, no," said Yogel, hastening to reassure him. "You were only inattentive, but you had talent. You had talent." They began to play the new mazurka. Nikolai could not refuse Yogel, and asked Sonia to dance. Denisov sat down by the elderly ladies, and leaning his elbow on his sword, and beating time with his foot, he began telling something amusing and making the old ladies laugh, while he watched the young ones dancing. Yogel was dancing in the first couple with Natasha, his best pupil and his pride. With soft and delicate movements of his little slippered feet, Yogel first flew across the room with Natasha, shy, but conscientiously executing her steps. Denisov did not take his eyes off her, and beat time with his sword with an air that betrayed that if he were not dancing, it was because he would not, and not because he could not dance. In the middle of a figure, he beckoned Rostov to him. "That's not the right thing a bit," he said. "Is that the Polish mazurka? But she does dance splendidly." Knowing that Denisov had been renowned even in Poland for his fine dancing of the Polish mazurka, Nikolai ran up to Natasha. "Go and choose Denisov. He does dance. It's a marvel," he said. When it was Natasha's turn again, she got up, and, tripping rapidly with her ribbon-trimmed dancing shoes, she timidly ran alone across the room to the corner where Denisov was sitting. She saw that everyone was looking at her, waiting to see what she would do. Nikolai saw that Denisov and Natasha were carrying on a smiling dispute, and that Denisov was refusing, though his face wore a delighted smile. He ran up. "Please do, Vasily Dmitrievich," Natasha was saying. "Come, please." "Oh, have mercy on me, Countess," Denisov was saying jocosely. "Come now. Nonsense, Vaska," said Nikolai. "They coax me like the pussycat, Vaska," said Denisov good-humoredly. "I'll sing to you a whole evening," said Natasha. "The little witch, she can do anything with me," said Denisov, and he unhooked his sword. He came out from behind the chairs, clasped his partner firmly by the hand, raised his head, and stood with one foot behind the other, waiting for the time. It was only on horseback and in the mazurka that Denisov's low stature was not noticeable, and that he looked the dashing hero he felt himself to be. At the right bar in the time, he glanced sideways with a triumphant and amused air at his partner, and making an unexpected tap with one foot, he bounded springily like a ball from the floor, and flew round, whirling his partner round with him. He flew inaudibly across the floor with one leg forward, and seemed not to see the chairs standing before him, darting straight at them. But all at once, with a clink of his spurs and a flourish of his foot, he stopped short on his heels, stood so a second, with a clanking of spurs stamped with both feet, whirled rapidly round, and clapping the left foot against the right, again he flew round. Natasha's instinct told her what he was going to do, and without herself knowing how she did it, she followed his lead, abandoning herself to him. At one moment he spun her round, first on his right arm, then on his left arm, then falling on one knee, twirled her round him, and again galloped, dashing forward with such vehemence that he seemed to intend to race through the whole suite of rooms without taking breath. Then he stopped suddenly again, and executed new and unexpected steps in the dance. When, after spinning his partner round before her seat, he drew up smartly with a clink of his spurs, bowing to her, Natasha did not even make him a curtsy. She looked at him smiling with a puzzled face, as though she did not recognize him. "What does it mean?" she said. Although Yogel would not acknowledge this mazurka as the real one, everyone was enchanted with Denisov's dancing of it, and he was continually being chosen as partner, while the old gentleman, smiling, talked about Poland and the good old days. Denisov, flushed with his exertions and mopping his face with his handkerchief, sat by Natasha and would not leave her side all the rest of the ball. Chapter 13. For 2 days after the dance, Rostov had not seen Dolohov at his people's house, nor found him at home. On the 3rd day he received a note from him. "As I do not intend to be at your house again, owing to causes of which you are aware, and am going to rejoin the regiment, I am giving a farewell supper to my friends. Come to the English Hotel." On the day fixed, Rostov went at about 10 o'clock, from the theatre, where he had been with his family and Denisov, to the English Hotel. He was at once conducted to the best room in the hotel, which Dolohov had taken for the occasion. Some 20 men were gathered about a table, before which Dolohov was sitting between 2 candles. On the table lay money and notes, and Dolohov was keeping the bank. Nikolai had not seen him again since his offer and Sonia's refusal, and he felt uneasy at the thought of meeting him. Dolohov's clear, cold glance met Rostov in the doorway, as though he had been expecting him a long while. "It's a long while since we've met," said he. "Thanks for coming. I'll just finish dealing here, and Ilyushka will make his appearance with his chorus." "I did go to see you," said Rostov, flushing. Dolohov made him no reply. "You might put down a stake," he said. Rostov recalled at that instant a strange conversation he once had with Dolohov. "None but fools trust to luck in play," Dolohov had said then. "Or are you afraid to play with me?" Dolohov said now, as though divining Rostov's thought, and he smiled. Behind his smile, Rostov saw in him that mood which he had seen in him at the club dinner and at other times, when Dolohov seemed, as it were, weary of the monotony of daily life, and felt a craving to escape from it by some strange, for the most part, cruel act. Rostov felt ill at ease. He racked his brain, and could not find in it a joke in which to reply to Dolohov's words. But before he had time to do so, Dolohov, looking straight into Rostov's face, said to him slowly and deliberately, so that all could hear, "Do you remember? I was talking to you about play. He's a fool who trusts to luck in play. One must play a sure game, and I want to try." "Try his luck, or try to play a sure game?" wondered Rostov. "Indeed, and you'd better not play," he added, and throwing down a pack he had just torn open, he said, "Bank, gentlemen." Moving the money forward, Dolohov began dealing. Rostov sat near him, and at first he did not play. Dolohov glanced at him. "Why don't you play?" said Dolohov. And strange to say, Nikolai felt that he could not help taking up a card, staking a trifling sum on it, and beginning to play. "I have no money with me," said Rostov. "I'll trust you." Rostov staked 5 rubles on a card, and lost it, staked again and again lost. Dolohov killed, that is, beat, 10 cards in succession from Rostov. "Gentlemen," he said, after dealing again for a little while, "I beg you to put the money on the cards, or else I shall get muddled over the reckoning." One of the players said that he hoped he could trust him. "I can trust you, but I'm afraid of making mistakes," "I beg you to lay the money on the cards," answered Dólokhov. "You needn't worry. We'll settle our accounts," he added to Rostov. The play went on. A footman never ceased carrying round champagne. All Rostov's cards were beaten, and the sum of 800 rubles was scored against him. He wrote on a card 800 rubles, but while champagne was being poured out for him, he changed his mind and again wrote down the usual stake, 20 rubles. "Leave it," said Dólokhov, though he did not seem to be looking at Rostov. "You'll win it back all the sooner. I lose to the rest, while I win from you. Or perhaps you are afraid of me," he repeated. Rostov excused himself, left the stake of 800, and laid down the 7 of hearts, a card with a corner torn, which he had picked up from the ground. Well he remembered that card afterwards. He laid down the 7 of hearts, wrote on it, with a broken piece of chalk, 800, in bold, round figures. He drank the glass of warmed champagne that had been given him, smiled at Dolokhov's words, and with a sinking at his heart, waiting for the 7 of hearts, he watched Dolokhov's hands that held the pack. The loss or gain of that card meant a great deal for Rostov. On the previous Sunday, Count Ilya Andreitch had given his son 2,000 rubles, and though he never liked speaking of money difficulties, he told him that this money was the last they would get till May, and so he begged him to be a little more careful. Nikolai said that that was too much really for him, and that he would give him his word of honor not to come for more before May. Now there was only 1,200 out of that 2,000 left, so that on the 7 of hearts there hung not merely the loss of 1,600 rubles, but the consequent inevitable betrayal of his word. With a sinking heart he watched Dolokhov's hands and thought, "Well, make haste and deal me that card, and I'll take my cap and drive home to supper with Denisov, Natasha, and Sonia, and I'm sure I'll never take a card in my hand again." At that moment his home life, his jokes with Petya, his talks with Sonia, his duets with Natasha, his game of piquet with his father, even his comfortable bed in the house at Povarsky, rose before his imagination with such vividness, such brightness, and such charm, that it seemed as though it were all some long past, lost, and hitherto unappreciated happiness. He could not conceive that a stupid chance, leading the 7 to the right rather than to the left, could deprive him of all that happiness felt now with new comprehension, and seen in a new radiance, could hurl him into the abyss of unknown and undefined misery. It could not be. But yet it was with a thrill of dread that he waited for the movement of Dolokhov's hands. Those broad-boned, reddish hands, with hairs visible under the shirt-cuffs, laid down the pack of cards and took up the glass and pipe that had been handed him. "So, you're not afraid to play with me," repeated Dolokhov, and as though he were about to tell a good story, he laid down the cards, leaned back in his chair, and began deliberately with a smile. "Yes, gentlemen, I have been told there's a story going about Moscow that I'm too sharp with cards, so I advise you to be a little on your guard with me." "Come, deal away," said Rostov. "Ugh, these Moscow gossips," said Dolokhov, and he took up the cards with a smile. "Ah!" Rostov almost screamed, putting both his hands up to his hair. The 7 he needed was lying uppermost, the first card in the pack. He had lost more than he could pay. "Don't swim beyond your depth, though," said Dolokhov, with a passing glance at Rostov, and he went on. Chapter 14. Within an hour and a half, the greater number of the players were no longer seriously interested in their own play. The whole interest of the game was concentrated on Rostov. Instead of a mere loss of 1,600 rubles, he had by now scored against him a long column of figures, which he had added up to the 10,000, though he vaguely supposed that by now it had risen to 15,000. In reality, the score had already exceeded 20,000 roubles. Dólokhov was not now listening to stories, or telling them. He followed every movement of Rostov's hands, and from time to time took a cursory survey of his score with him. He had resolved to keep the play up till that score had reached 43,000. He had fixed on that number because it represented the sum of his and Sonia's ages. Rostov sat with his head propped in both hands, before the wine-stained table scrawled over with scorings and littered with cards. One torturing sensation never left him, those broad-boned, reddish hands, with the hairs visible under the shirt-cuffs. Those hands, which he loved and hated, held him in their power. 600 roubles. Ace, corner, 9. Winning it backs out of the question. And how happy I should be at home. The knave. Double or quits it can't be. And why is he doing this to me? Rostov pondered and thought. Sometimes he put a higher stake on a card, but Dólokhov refused it and fixed the stake himself. Nikolai submitted to him, and at one moment he was praying to God, as he had prayed under fire on the bridge of Amstetten. At the next, he tried his fortune on the chance that the card that he would first pick up among the heap of crumpled ones under the table would save him. Then he reckoned up the rows of braidings on his coat, and tried staking the whole amount of his losses on a card of that number. Then he looked round for help to the others playing, or stared into Dólokhov's face, which looked quite cold now, and tried to penetrate into what was passing within him. He knows, of course, what this loss means to me. Surely he can't want me to be ruined. Why, he was my friend. I loved him. But indeed, it's not his fault. What's he to do if he has all the luck? And it's not my fault, he kept saying to himself. I have done nothing wrong. I haven't murdered or hurt anyone or wished anyone harm, have I? What is this awful calamity for? And when did it begin? Such a little while ago I came to this table with the idea of winning 100 roubles, and buying Mamma that little casket for her name-day, and going home. I was so happy, so free, so light-hearted, and I didn't even know then how happy I was. When did all that end? And when did this new awful state of things begin? What was the outward token of that change? I still went on sitting in the same place at this table, and in the same way picking out cards and putting them forward, and watching those deft, broad-boned hands. When did it come to pass? And what has come to pass? I am strong, and well, and still the same, and still in the same place. No, it cannot be. It will all be sure to end in nothing. He was all red and in a sweat, though the room was not hot, and his face was painful and piteous to see, particularly from its helpless efforts to seem calm. The score reached the fateful number of 43,000 roubles. Rostov already had the card ready, which he meant to stake for double or quits on the 3,000 that had just been put down to his score, when Dólokhov slapped the pack of cards down on the table, pushed it away, and, taking the chalk, began rapidly in his clear, strong hand writing down the total of Rostov's losses, breaking the chalk as he did so. Supper time, and here are the gypsies. And some swarthy men and women did in fact come in from the cold outside, saying something with their gypsy accent. Nikolai grasped that it was all over, but he said in an indifferent voice, "What? Won't you go on? And I have such a nice little card already," as though what chiefly interested him was the game itself. "It's all over. I'm done for," he thought. "Now a bullet through the head's the only thing left for me." And at the same time he was saying in a cheerful voice, "Come, just one more card." "Very good," answered Dólokhov, finishing his addition. "Very good. 21 roubles. Done," he said, pointing to the figure 21, over and above the round sum of 43,000, and, taking a pack, he made ready to deal. Rostov submissively turned down the corner, and instead of the 8,000 he had meant to write, noted down 21. "It's all the same to me," he said. "Only it's interesting to me to know whether you will win on that 10, or let me have it." Dolokhov began seriously dealing. Oh, how Rostov hated at that moment those reddish hands, with their short fingers and the hairs visible under the shirt-sleeves, those hands that held him in their clutches. The 10 was not beaten. 43,000 to your score, Count," said Dolokhov, and he got up from the table, stretching. "One does get tired sitting so long," he said. "Yes, I'm tired too," said Rostov. Dolokhov cut him short, as though to warn him it was not for him to take a light tone. "When am I to receive the money, Count?" Rostov, flushing hotly, drew Dolokhov away into the other room. "I can't pay it all at once. You must take an IOU," he said. "Listen, Rostov," said Dolokhov, smiling brightly, and looking straight into Nikolai's eyes. "You know the saying, lucky in love, unlucky at cards? Your cousin is in love with you. I know it." "Oh, this is awful to feel oneself in this man's power like this," thought Rostov. He knew the shock the news of this loss would be to his father and mother. He knew what happiness it would be to be free of it all, and felt that Dolokhov knew that he could set him free from this shame and grief, and wanted now to play cat and mouse with him. "Your cousin," Dolokhov would have said, but Nikolai cut him short. "My cousin has nothing to do with the matter, and there is no need to mention her," he cried, with fury. "Then, when am I to receive it?" asked Dolokhov. "Tomorrow," said Rostov, and went out of the room. Chapter 15. To say tomorrow and maintain the right tone was not difficult, but to arrive home alone, to see his sisters and brother, his mother and father, to confess and beg for money to which he had no right after giving his word of honor, was terrible. At home, they had not yet gone to bed. The younger members of the family, after coming home from the theatre, had had supper, and were now in a group about the clavichord. As soon as Nikolai entered the hall, he felt himself enfolded in the poetic atmosphere of love which dominated their household that winter, and now, since Dolokhov's proposal and Yogol's ball, seemed to have grown thicker about Sonia and Natasha, like the air before a storm. Sonia and Natasha, wearing the light blue dresses they had put on for the theatre, stood at the clavichord, pretty and conscious of being so, happy and smiling. Vera was playing draughts with Shinshin in the drawing-room. The old countess, waiting for her son and her husband to come in, was playing patience with an old gentlewoman, who was one of their household. Denisov, with shining eyes and ruffled hair, was sitting with one leg behind him at the clavichord. He was striking chords with his short fingers, and rolling his eyes, as he sang in his small, husky, but true voice, a poem of his own composition, The Enchantress, to which he was trying to fit music. Enchantress, say what hidden fire draws me to my forsaken lyre, what rapture thrills my fingers slow, what passion sets my heart aglow. He sang in his passionate voice, his black, agate eyes gleaming at the frightened and delighted Natasha. "Splendid! Capital!" Natasha cried. "Another couplet," she said, not noticing Nikolai. "Everything's just the same with them," thought Nikolai, peeping into the drawing-room, where he saw Vera and his mother and the old lady playing patience with her. "Ah, and here's Nikolenka!" Natasha ran up to him. "Is Papa at home?" he asked. "How glad I am that you have come," said Natasha, not answering his question. "We are having such fun. Vasily Dmitrievich is staying a day longer for me, do you know?" "No, Papa has not come in yet," answered Sonia. "Kolya, you there? "Come to me, darling," said the voice of the Countess from the drawing-room. Nikolai went up to his mother, kissed her hand, and sitting down by her table, began silently watching her hands as they dealt the cards. From the hall he kept hearing the sound of laughter and merry voices, persuading Natasha to do something. "Oh, very well, Denisov cried. "Now it's no use crying off. It's your turn to sing the barcarolle. I entreat you." The Countess looked round at her silent son. "What's the matter?" his mother asked Nikolai. "Oh, nothing," he said, as though sick of being continually asked the same question. "Will Papa soon be in?" "I expect so." "Everything's the same with them. They know nothing about it. What am I to do with myself?" thought Nikolai, and he went back to the hall where the clavichord was. Sonia was sitting at the clavichord, playing the prelude of the barcarolle that Denisov particularly liked. Natasha was preparing to sing. Denisov was watching her with impassioned eyes. Nikolai began walking to and fro in the room. What can induce her to want to sing? What can she sing? And there's nothing to be so happy about in it, thought Nikolai. Sonia struck the first chord of the prelude. My God, I'm ruined. I'm a dishonored man. Bullet through my head, that's the only thing left for me, and not singing, he thought. Go away? But where? It makes no difference, let them sing. Still walking about the room, Nikolai glanced gloomily at Denisov and the girls, avoiding their eyes. Nikolenka, what's the matter? Sonia's eyes asked, looking intently at him. She saw at once that something had happened to him. Nikolai turned away from her. Natasha, too, with her quick instinct, instantly detected her brother's state of mind. She noticed him, but she was herself in such high spirits at that moment, she was so far from sorrow, from sadness, from reproaches, that purposely she deceived herself, as young people so often do. No, I'm too happy just now to spoil my enjoyment by sympathy with anyone's sorrow, she felt, and she said to herself, No, I'm most likely mistaken. He must be happy, just as I am. Come, Sonia, she said, walking into the very middle of the room, where, to her mind, the resonance was best of all. Holding her head up, letting her arms hang lifelessly as dancers do, Natasha, with a vigorous turn from her heel onto her toe, walked over to the middle of the room and stood still. Behold me, here I am, she seemed to say, in response to the enthusiastic gaze with which Denisov followed her. And what can she find to be so pleased at? Nikolai wondered, looking at his sister. How is it she isn't feeling dull and ashamed? Natasha took the first note. Her throat swelled, her bosom heaved, a serious expression came into her face. She was thinking of no one and of nothing at that moment, and from her smiling mouth poured forth notes, those notes that anyone can produce at the same intervals, and hold for the same length of time, yet 1,000 times they leave us cold, and the 1,001st time they set us thrilling and weeping. Natasha had for the first time begun that winter to take singing seriously, especially since Denisov had been so enthusiastic over her singing. She did not now sing like a child. There was not now in her singing that comical childish effort which used to be perceptible in it. But she did not yet sing well, said the musical connoisseurs who heard her. Not trained. A fine voice. It must be trained, everyone said. But this was usually said a good while after her voice was hushed. While that untrained voice, with its irregular breathing and its strained transitions, sounded, even connoisseurs said nothing, and simply enjoyed that untrained voice, and simply longed to hear it again. Her voice had a virginal purity, an ignorance of its capacities, and an unlabored velvety softness, so closely connected with its lack of art in singing, that it seemed as though nothing could be changed in that voice without spoiling it. How is it, thought Nikolai, hearing her voice, and opening his eyes wide, what has happened to her? How she is singing today, he thought. And all at once the whole world was for him concentrated into anticipations of the next note, the next bar, and everything in the world seemed divided up into three motives. Oh, mio crudele affetto. 1, 2, 3, 1. Oh, mio crudele affetto. 1, 2, 3, 1. Oh, this senseless life of ours, thought Nikolai. All that, this calamity, and money, and Dolohov, and anger, and honor, it's all nonsense. And this is what's the real thing. Now, Natasha, now, darling, now, my girl. How will she take that sea? Taken it, thank God! And without being conscious that he was singing, he himself sung a second to support her high note. My God, how fine! Can I have taken that note? How glorious, he thought. Oh, how that note had thrilled, and how something better that was in Rostov's soul began thrilling too. And that something was apart from everything in the world, and above everything in the world. What were losses, and Dolohovs, and honor beside it? All nonsense. One might murder and steal, and yet be happy. Chapter 16. It was long since Rostov had derived such enjoyment from music as on that day. But as soon as Natasha had finished her barcarolle, the reality forced itself upon his mind again. Saying nothing, he went out, and went downstairs to his own room. A quarter of an hour later, the old prince came in, good-humored and satisfied from his club. Nikolai heard him come in, and went in to him. "Well, had a good time?" said Ilya Andreevitch, smiling proudly and joyfully to his son. Nikolai tried to say yes, but could not. He was on the point of sobbing. The Count was lighting his pipe, and did not notice his son's condition. "Ugh, it's inevitable," thought Nikolai, for the first and last time. And all at once, as though he were asking for the carriage to drive into town, he said to his father in the most casual tone that made him feel vile to himself, "Papa, I have come to you on a matter of business I was almost forgetting. I want some money." "You don't say so," said his father, who happened to be in particularly good spirits. "I told you that we shouldn't be having any. Do you want a large sum?" "Very large," said Nikolai, flushing and smiling a stupid, careless smile, for which, long after, he could not forgive himself. "I have lost a little at cards. That is a good deal. Really, a great deal. 43,000. "What? To whom? You're joking!" cried the Count, flushing as old people flush, an apoplectic red over his neck and the back of his head. "I've promised to pay it tomorrow," said Nikolai. "Oh!" said the Count, flinging up his arms, and he dropped helplessly on the sofa. "It can't be helped. It happens to everyone," said his son in a free and easy tone, while in his heart he was feeling himself a low scoundrel, whose whole life could not atone for his crime. He would have liked to kiss his father's hands, to beg his forgiveness on his knees, while carelessly, rudely even, he was telling him that it happened to everyone. Count Ilya Andreevitch dropped his eyes when he heard those words from his son, and began moving hurriedly, as though looking for something. "Yes, yes," he brought out. "It will be difficult, I fear. Difficult to raise. Happens to everyone. Yes, it happens to everyone." And the Count cast a fleeting glance at his son's face and walked out of the room. Nikolai had been prepared to face resistance, but he had not expected this. "Papa! Papa!" he cried after him, sobbing, "Forgive me!" And clutching at his father's hand, he pressed it to his lips and burst into tears. While the father and son were having this interview, another, hardly less important, was taking place between the mother and daughter. Natasha, in great excitement, had run in to her mother. "Mamma, mamma, he has made me—" "Made you what?" "He's made an offer. Mamma, mamma!" she kept crying. The Countess could not believe her ears. Denísov had made an offer? To whom? To this chit of a girl, Natasha, who had only just given up playing with dolls and was still having lessons? "Natasha, enough of this silliness," she said, hoping it was a joke. "Silliness indeed! I am telling you the fact," said Natasha angrily. "I have come to ask you what to do, and you talk to me of silliness." The Countess shrugged her shoulders. "If it is true that Monsieur Denísov has made you an offer, then tell him he is a fool, that's all." "No, he's not a fool," said Natasha, resentfully and seriously. "Well, what would you have then? You are all in love, it seems, nowadays. Oh well, if you're in love with him, better marry him," said the Countess, laughing angrily. "And God bless you." "No, mamma, I'm not in love with him. I suppose I'm not in love with him." "Well then, tell him so." "Mamma, are you cross? Don't be cross, darling. It's not my fault, is it?" "No. But upon my word, my dear, if you like, I will go and tell him so," said the Countess, smiling. "No, I'll do it myself. Only tell me how to say it. Everything comes easy to you," she added, responding to her smile. "And if you could have seen how he said it to me! I know he did not mean to say it, but said it by accident." "Well, anyway, you must refuse him." "No, I mustn't. I feel so sorry for him. He's so nice." "Oh, well, accept his proposal, then. High time you were married, I suppose," said her mother angrily and ironically. "No, mamma, but I'm so sorry for him. I don't know how to say it." "Well, there's no need for you to say anything. I'll speak to him myself," said the Countess, indignant that anyone should have dared to treat this little Natasha as grown up. "No, not on any account. I'll go myself, and you listen at the door." And Natasha ran across the drawing-room to the hall, where Denísov, his face in his hands, was still sitting in the same chair at the clavichord. He jumped up at the sound of her light footsteps. "Natalie," he said, moving with rapid steps towards her, "decide my fate. It is in your hands." "Vasily Dmitrich, I'm so sorry for you. No, but you are so nice. But it won't do. But I shall always love you as I do now." Denísov bent over her, and she heard strange sounds that she did not understand. She kissed his tangled, curly black head. At that moment they heard the hurried rustle of the Countess's skirts. She came up to them. "Vasily Dmitrich, I thank you for the honor you do us," said the Countess, in an embarrassed voice, which sounded severe to Denísov. "But my daughter is so young, and I should have thought that as my son's friend you would have come first to me. In that case you would not have forced me to make this refusal." "Countess," said Denísov, with downcast eyes and a guilty face. He tried to say more, and stammered. Natasha could not see him in such a piteous plight without emotion. She began to whimper loudly. "Countess, I have acted wrongly," Denísov went on in a breaking voice. "But believe me, I so adore your daughter and all your family that I'd give my life twice over." He looked at the Countess and noticed her stern face. "Well, good-bye, Countess," he said, kissing her hand, and without glancing at Natasha, he walked with rapid and resolute steps out of the room. Next day Rostov saw Denísov off, as he was unwilling to remain another day in Moscow. All his Moscow friends gave him a farewell entertainment at the gypsies, and he had no recollection of how they got him into his sledge, or of the first 3 stations he passed. After Denísov's departure, Rostov spent another fortnight in Moscow, waiting for the money to pay his debt, which the Count was unable to raise all at once. He hardly left the house, and spent most of his time in the young girl's room. Sonia was more affectionate and devoted to him than ever. She seemed to want to show him that his loss at cards was an exploit for which she loved him more than ever. But now Nikolai regarded himself as unworthy of her. He copied music for the girls, and wrote verses in their albums, and after at last sending off all the 43,000 rubles, and receiving Dolohov's receipt for it, he left Moscow towards the end of November, without taking leave of any of his acquaintances, and overtook his regiment, which was already in Poland. Part 2. Chapter 1. After his interview with his wife, Pierre had set off for Petersburg. At the station of Torzhok there were no horses, or the overseer was unwilling to let him have them. Pierre had to wait. Without removing his outdoor things, he lay down on a leather sofa, in front of a round table, put up his big feet in their thick overboots on this table, and sank into thought. "Shall I bring in the trunks? Make up a bed? Will you take tea?" the valet kept asking. Pierre made no reply, for he heard nothing and said nothing. He had been deep in thought since he left the last station, and still went on thinking of the same thing, of something so important that he did not notice what was passing around him. Far from being concerned whether he reached Petersburg sooner or later, or whether there would or would not be a place for him to rest in at this station, in comparison with the thoughts that engrossed him now, it was a matter of utter indifference to him whether he spent a few hours or the rest of his life at that station. The overseer and his wife, his valet, and a peasant woman with Torzhok embroidery for sale came into the room, offering their services. Without changing the position of his raised feet, Pierre gazed at them over his spectacles, and did not understand what they could want and how they all managed to live, without having solved the questions that absorbed him. These same questions had possessed his mind ever since that day when he had come back after the duel from Sokolniki, and had spent that first agonizing, sleepless night. But now in the solitude of his journey they seized upon him with special force. Of whatever he began thinking, he came back to the same questions, which he could not answer, and from which he could not escape. It was as though the chief screw in his brain upon which his whole life rested were loose. The screw moved no forwarder, no backwarder, but still it turned, catching on nothing, always in the same groove, and there was no making it cease turning. The overseer came in, and began humbly begging His Excellency to wait only a couple of hours, after which he would, come what might of it, let His Excellency have the special mail service horses. The overseer was unmistakably lying, with the sole aim of getting an extra tip from the traveler. Was that good or bad? Pierre wondered. For me, good. For the next traveler, bad. And for himself, inevitable, because he has nothing to eat. He said that an officer had thrashed him for it, and the officer thrashed him because he had to travel in haste. And I shot Dolokhov because I considered myself injured. Louis XVI was executed because they considered him to be a criminal, and a year later his judges were killed too for something.